Don't even sweat.
Yeah, don't.
It doesn't make all of those.
Really, really tiny. You need powder that.
I'm sorry.
And I wear a lot of shirt.
So we'll call the meeting to order. And we do we have any questions from the previous meeting? We had the EARS grant, and so we had Brad and Katie and Travis from athletics. So then I know I sent out the minutes kind of late, but if we have any questions about the minutes, we can get those approved from the last meeting.
I motion to approve the minutes from April 25th, 2023.
I second.
So then we can vote, all in favor of the minutes as presented,
Aye.
and those are approved. And we will move into the Mancos School Board meeting summary with Todd.
So we had a good meeting last night. We covered a lot on the budget. And so Chrissy Miller here, our business manager, will be here to give us an update, a little bit about how we're wrapping up this year and how things look going into next year. And so I'll save that for Chrissy's. We also had a good discussion around affirming project-based learning for the school district. And the board agreed to move forward with a 3-year professional development schedule for project-based learning. So that'll be continuing forward really strong. And then I think probably the most exciting news at the board meeting is the Board of Education approved the recommendation to hire a new principal at the elementary school following Kathy's resignation from that position, as she'll be moving into the 3rd grade next year. And that gentleman's name is Mr. Seth Levine.
As his wife comes in late, so that's good.
So we're really excited about that. Just a top-notch quality educator, top-notch quality guy. I think he's going to fit in beautifully, and I personally, I'm very, very pleased. The interview committee was extremely impressed with him. They had 2 super strong candidates. The other candidate was Dr. Mary Marable, and so they had 2 great candidates to evaluate, and Seth was the right person for the position. And so we're really excited to have him on the team.
Did we get to Kate Maribel? Did she stay?
She stayed,
Yeah.
Yeah, she's great. She's just terrific. We're really fortunate to have her in the school district. You know, she's been in education for 36 years. She's been an administrator, and she's a great math teacher, and we're really fortunate to have her. And that's that.
All right. There's something going on possibly with the elementary curriculum that maybe, I know Kathy presented that they were working on the elementary curriculum.
Yeah, so Kathy has presented to this group on some choices for the English language arts curriculum. And the board will be making the final decision on that on June 18th. We're hoping to get Mr. Levine's input on that before we adopt a 5-year ELA curriculum. So the poor gentleman hasn't even been hired yet, and we're putting him to work. So I'll be reaching out to him about that. But that's going to be part of the action items for June 18th. And I've been speaking with the curriculum provider this afternoon, and that time frame works just fine. They'll work good for our process, and we'll be able to make good progress.
Good, fantastic. Looking forward to hearing more about that. So we will move on to our topics of the month. which are the budget fiscal year 24. And we have Chrissy Miller here to present that to us.
Okay, well, I did not, I'm just gonna kind of wing it. I've been talking about budget till nonstop, so hopefully I can get the key points to you. So I'll talk about fiscal year 23 for just a moment, because we're closing out that fiscal year, ends June 30th. So busy making sure all of our grants are spent and busy just making sure everything is coming in like it should. The one thing that we did find this year with our budget is at the beginning of the year, we started the Pathways program, which you guys, I'm sure, are familiar with, which was awesome. We were going to get what was called the co-action grant, Pathways grant. So that didn't pan out like we had truly expected it to pan out. So we had budgeted around $200,000 in expenditures, because when you start those programs, it takes a lot of money to get it all up and running, buying the curriculums, the equipment, just everything, the supplies, everything that goes into all of those pathways. Unfortunately, the grant didn't pan out like we had wanted it to, and you guys may know some of this already. So the reason I'm bringing this up is every year at this time, I go through the current budget and I see what's unspent. I see what that dollar amount is that we could possibly carry over into the new fiscal year. And so that the money that is unspent in a budget carries over into what's called the beginning fund balance. And that's how we start every school year. And the beginning fund balance is just basically a savings account for the school. And that's there for big projects that require resolutions from the board in order to spend into that savings account for anything. No matter what you want, it has to go through the board, take board action with a resolution. So when I was trying to figure out what our carryover would be into that beginning fund balance for this year, being how that Pathways grant, co-action grant didn't come through like we were hoping it would, we spent around $200,000 getting that up and running. And so we basically are using our general fund money to get that started this year, because I think we ended up maybe with about $22,000 coming back from co-action. But what I have to say is Todd has been so diligent about applying for grants. This guy is incredible. He has about what, $600,000, $700,000 out right now in grant applications. So we should start seeing some money coming in. We recently got a $10,000 one to help with our drone cost. There's a $30,000 one that we feel very confident we might get for drones as well. Because our drone pathway was super expensive. Buying the Mac computers, buying all the drones, that cost quite a bit. So he's been working very hard to recoup some of that money since that co-action grant didn't pan out. So anyway, long story short about how that came about, I don't foresee us carrying over any money this year into next fiscal year. I think it's going to kind of stay flat unless some of these grants come in that he's applied for and we can actually record them in this fiscal year. Then we might see somewhat of a carryover. But right now, I'm going to say no, which is okay, because we had $2.7 million in our reserves. So it's not like we're like, oh, we need this money, because we don't.
Sorry, Chrissy, but
Sure.
that grant money, if it comes in after June 30th,
Yeah, well, oh.
it can be then applied to
Next-
24?
Yes.
Okay,
Mhm,
it just won't be considered carryover.
Correct.
Okay.
Mhm.
So our fiscal year is June 30th?
Yep, it goes to July 1 to June 30th.
Okay.
Yep. So yeah, so that's why we're busy trying to wrap it up, because June 30th is our cutoff. So with that being said, we're not gonna carry over money, but like I said, with 2.7 million in reserves, which I feel is very healthy for our school. So we're okay. And if we get those grants that come in next year, some of them are foundation grants, which are wonderful because there's no strings attached to those dollars, and we can use those wherever it's needed. So for instance, all of our pathway startups are in this fiscal year. So it's not like I can really apply it next year because we've already spent the money in this fiscal year. So we're gonna have to find a different way to spend the money. But if it's foundation, we're golden. We'll stick it into technology, help with our Chromebooks and computer costs and different things is what we'll end up doing. So they're going after a lot of foundation grants because there's no strings attached to those, which is really helpful.
So there's a priority list of where the foundation money goes first. correct?
When they write the grant, they tell them what we need the money for.
Okay.
And we do try to honor that, obviously, because that's why we're writing the grant. So yes, because every one of the grants has a different, you write one for drones, you write one for technology, you know, there's a specific need for that specific grant. So we're ending up the year fine for this year. So that's
Right.
basically
So-
what I'm gonna talk about for fiscal year
Yeah, so for
23.
this year, we're ending with a balanced budget.
Yep,
We don't have extra money going into next year, nor did we spend into our savings.
Yep.
So it was a balanced budget.
which is really what you want to do. Once you have your reserves built up to where we feel like we don't need to try to save money. Because you want to only carry so much money, you want to be giving it back to programming and your staff and, you know, that's the whole point. So you don't want to just be hoarding all this money and not spending it on raises or whatever we need to do. So we're in a good place for that. So then moving forward to fiscal year 24, which starts July 1st, we ended up with an increase in our total program this year. And our total program is what we get per student. So we get a certain amount of money each year per student. So this year we increased, the state gave us, we're gonna have $11,823 per student. Last year in January, when we finalized our fiscal year 22 budget, or fiscal year 23 budget, we were at $10,692. So we have an increase of $1,100 per student, which is awesome. And so based on our budget, we are looking at about a $500,000 increase in total revenue, which is huge. So our priorities for fiscal year 24 is salary. I know we've been talking about that nonstop. So this year we were able to, I believe, give one of the biggest raises we've ever given for the school district, which is really nice for our staff. We were able to give our classified staff a 16.91% raise based off of this current salary schedule that we have currently for this year. It equated to 16.91%. So this will increase, or this will ensure that all staff members on that classified schedule start at least $15 an hour. We're on our current one, it's $12.83. And then we had to increase people to $13.65 when the minimum wage hike. So this year we went up to 15 to where we will hopefully in January, when we see another minimum wage increase, which we anticipate, obviously, we will be above that, hopefully. And then now we'll be able to kind of stay ahead of it, in the front of it, to keep giving more money to our classified staff. And then for the certified staff, all of our teaching staff plus our professionals, which are our directors, so maintenance director, transportation director, those folks were able to get an 8.82% raise, which equates to like $3,000 on the base, plus they were all given a step, which is $525 for teachers and $857 for professionals. And the teachers is a little bit less, is because they can move over horizontally and vertically on their salary schedule, so they have a chance at making more money, where a professional staff can only get it going down. So that's why theirs is a little bit more, because they can't, that's all they can get. So that was great for those folks. And then the admin staff received a 5% increase on their base salaries as well. So we were able to do that, and it was kind of expensive. It cost the district around $650,000 to make that happen this year. So that was a significant chunk of our budget, which in order to do that, we had $500,000 more in program funding, And then the rest of the money, we just went through the budget and tightened our, purse strings everywhere we could to find more money. And then we've gotten some grants that are gonna come in to help with one-time monies, one-time expenditures, to where it freed up some general fund money to put into the salaries. So it worked out really nicely. I think our staff will be very grateful. I wish it was more. Obviously, every year we want more and more and more, but that's our priority, and that's what we're gonna continue to work really hard towards.
So if some of it's coming because if we're able to do the increase because grant money came in, is that a risk in the future?
No, because the grant money that comes in, we just spend it on one-time purchases. So that would be like a technology purchase or something along those lines. So we don't want to ever use a grant money for salary. So there are several grants we do use only for salary, and that's like our Title I grants, because those we get every year. Those are ongoing, and we do use those for salary. But for the most part, we do not want to use grants to cover salary because you got to sustain that.
It just frees up that money that you otherwise would have spent on
Correct.
technology.
Yeah.
Has the state ever backed down on how much they provide per student? So
So like next year, they say, oh, we're gonna take, well, yeah, we've
That's
had,
a negative.
it's called it's a negative factor, but we are almost to finally get out from under that huge deficit that they did. So what was it, 2008? When we had that huge, 2011, when we had the huge problems with everything. And so the state couldn't balance their budget. And so they took from the schools to balance their state budget. And so then it put us into problems, and we've been dealing with that ever since, where we didn't get what we should have gotten in our total program funding. So it's really disappointing, but we're finally, I think they've been working really hard to try to give that back to school districts. And that's probably why we're able to give these bigger raises, because they're finally starting to come through with some of that money. I mean, it was ours to begin with, it's taken a while to recoup it, unfortunately. So yeah, and I mean, with inflation, we've had to really increase a lot of our different line items just for transportation, our fuel, our energy costs, those type of things really have doubled within, which really are hard for our school. When you're looking at electric bills that we used to have for 35 grand, now our budget's 70,000. I mean, that's a huge, it eats up a lot of our money, which is frustrating because we want to put it into our students and staff, but what do you do? It is what it is. So anyway, so this year we were just really, really careful and did a lot of work trying to find money to put into salary. And so that's what we ended up doing. And the last thing I just think is important to let you guys know. So last night at the board meeting, they did approve the May budget. So there's a preliminary budget in May that goes to the board just to say, hey, we're working on things and this is where we're at. Then by June 31st or 30th, we have to have a final budget that we operate our next fiscal year starting with. So they approved our May budget last night. And within that budget, just so you know, we did ask the board to deficit spend, which does require the resolution. And I'll tell you what we plan to use those dollars for. That we couldn't fit into our current budget, but we need these things. And so the board has agreed to let us do the deficit spend. So we have 4 things that we're going to use it for. Is our elementary curriculum. We're going to end up probably deficit spending around $60,000 to help pay for that curriculum. Our PBL initiative, where we're going to have that 3-year initiative. Are you guys up to speed on all that? Okay, so Todd got that scaled back. It originally was $100,000 a year. He got it scaled back to $60,000. So we're going to deficit spend that for 3 years in a row. We're going to do $60,000 for 3 years, unless we can somehow fit it in our budget. But right now, we're going to probably have to deficit spend unless money falls from the sky somewhere. But right now that we have that in there, and then the next thing is our preschool door key system. It's going to cost us about $22,000. We have to rekey the whole preschool and get it on the same system as the rest of the district. And that's going to cost $22,000. And so we're going to deficit spend the money for that. And then the final thing is there's all these different reserves within our accounts. So we have a contingency reserve within general fund is what our money is that we can use to spend on whatever we want, as long as it has a board approval. That is at that $2.7 million, right? So we feel like that's a pretty healthy number, and we don't have a lot of money in another fund that we call capital reserve. Our capital reserve fund is for big purchases of like replacing equipment that breaks down, like boilers, or replacing our turf on our football field when that comes time. Big dollars like that for that type of thing. Well, we only have $100,000 in that reserve. So what we decided to do is ask the board if we could take 100,000 out of our contingency reserve and move it over to our cap reserve. It's because we need to start building that cap reserve. And our goal is, Todd and I have discussed this, we'd like to get that to $1 million, because we're gonna need every penny of that when it comes to replacing bigger things. It costs a fortune. So that's our goal. And so they did agree for us to take that. So it's not like we're spending that money, we're just shifting it into a different account. So we're asking the board to deficit spend $242,000 this year at this point.
Can you use general fund money for capital
Yes,
projects
We
if you
can.
had to, even
Yes.
if that money isn't there, you could still use?
Yep, there's a chart of accounts and you have to code it differently, but you can definitely, we could buy a bus out of general fund if we
Okay.
wanted to and not cap reserve. It's just easier to record it all into that capital reserve account. It's easier to go back and track it, figure out what we spent on things. It's just easier to find. So we'd like to keep it in that cap reserve. Because we're gonna need a bus next year. We're gonna have to purchase a bus. Somehow, we're gonna have to figure that out. That's on our radar for.
And we don't want a false sense of security with having a healthy ending fund balance, but having very little money aside for the major things that we know are going to happen in the future.
Mhm.
Roofs, windows, buses, those are going to happen. So we'd rather, shift that money from our ending fund balance and earmark it for these major projects. And then we feel like that's a better reflection of the financial state of the district.
Because people can look at that and go, well, why are we not giving more raises to staff? Why are we not doing whatever? But the one thing I do want you to realize with the reserves, it has to only go for one-time expenditures. You can't do something like a salary where it's a reoccurring expenditure. That's against the statute. You can't do that. So we just want to make sure people understand that we're not hoarding money and we're not trying to not give it to the programming and to staffing at all. But our goal is to try to find a way in our budgets from every year to save $100,000 into cap reserve. We'd like to transfer from general to cap 100,000 if we can. It's just tough. So that's why we're gonna have to use some of our reserve this year to push over there. Because we realize, like he said, something's gonna break eventually, and you have to replace it.
So do you use some of the foundation grants to cover some of the deficit spending?
We obviously could, depending on what grants come in, we definitely could. So on paper right now in the budget, we're gonna say we're gonna deficit spend this money, but if we get different revenue sources that come in that can take the place of deficit spending, we'll obviously do that and substitute that with grants or whatever funding that could come through to help pay for it.
Okay, so right now it's temporarily.
Yeah, it's just on paper this way. And really the final budget's in January, because that's when October count numbers are final in October. We have our total true dollars of what we're given. And then we true up our budget at that point. And if by any stretch we can absorb some of these within the general fund, we obviously will do that. That's always a priority. Because it's hard to save money.
Are we accounting for an increase in enrollment for next year? Is that already in the formula?
Just a real modest one.
Mhm.
We tried, we've been seeing, last year going into this year, we anticipated about 8 kids and we got about 22 or 23 more. So this year going into next year, I think we How many did we do?
So we had 467 last year and we budgeted 475.
Right,
So-
eight again.
Yeah, just 8 kids and hopefully we'll have more.
I suspect it'll be higher. I think our reputation is constantly improving. And I think as a school district, by far, I feel like, we're by far the best school district in the area, if not the region.
Mhm.
And do we have the space to absorb kids?
At certain places, we do. Our average class size at the elementary is about 16.59 kids per classroom. And so, those classrooms could absorb, 2, 3, 4 more kids easily.
Do you have a maximum?
We want to, it's more of an operational matter and an education matter as opposed to just a size matter. So we really want to keep, our staff really values small class size and our parents really value small class size. Yeah, so we want to do our best to not burden that. I know, part of what Cortez School District did to balance their budget is they adjusted their class size ratios to allow for up to 24 in the elementary and 26 in the secondary. We want to keep ours smaller because there's a lot of community value in that.
Is there a number? Or is
We're not needing one. We're well below that. We're, in the past, there has been, but we're well below it. But it has been a conversation for the last 2 years.
Gotta keep the lights on too.
Yeah, it's a real balance. It's a real balancing act.
Mhm. So those are the highlights, and I don't want to take up any more time, but if anytime anybody has questions on budget or whatever, come in and talk to me, whatever, I can come back and talk some more on different things if you guys would like that in the future. So does that give you a good overview? Does it make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you very much for coming.
Sure, you bet,
Giving us all this info.
you bet. Thank you.
All right, so next on our agenda is Angela Guys.
Hi, thanks for having me. If you guys did anybody not pick up one of these blue handouts?
I did.
Okay, I got a couple more, yeah. Thank you guys for having me back. It's kind of exciting to get to do a couple of different things. And I'm really excited after, I think this is the second year in a row that, oh, sorry, Josh, that I've gotten to do this. And I have a lot, there's kind of a lot on this little paper and I'll just kind of dive in. Exceptional student services. A lot of times when you hear that those are students that lie outside, like kind of like outliers, if you will. They're all the way from gifted students to students that have disabilities and special education needs, right? I really cherish the semantics and the terminology that we've used here in this district for years and years. I think I was at a cross-country meet 2 years ago, and a student, this was after my 5th or 6th year in the district doing this, and a student, a junior said, or a sophomore said, I'm pretty sure that I get to be in her class next year. I don't know what she teaches, but I'm pretty sure it's a junior level class and you get to do that. So just the fact that our kids do, like, we're serving students and we're meeting kids with disabilities and we're providing special education services, and kids have no idea that that's actually largely what's going on and that's what's happening. So there's something a little bit special and cool about that. So when you see this ESS, that's what that is. Just so you know. Kind of following down to the second picture here, I wanted to give you guys an overview of what the ESS team looks like, right? Starting at the top left corner, we've got families. Obviously, parents are experts on their students, and sometimes those families, especially kids with disabilities, come along with some professional medical, right? The school doesn't have a resident doctor, so those medical professionals are always welcome. Parents can request, any outside professional actually to be part of their students' team. And that's honored and welcomed, actually. The more help you have there understanding things that are going on, the better. And then I kind of move around clockwise to our general education or content teachers. Those are all of our teachers that teach math, English, science, reading, PE, health, social studies, drone, everything that's taught as a tier 1 or as like everyone gets that instruction. That's a general education or a content teacher. And these people have to be on this team for every single student that is identified within the ESS program. There's also a case manager. And sometimes, often that case manager is also a teacher. So in the past, this year was the first year that I was a high school case manager. However, I was not the only direct service provider for my students. We were able to have a paraprofessional that came in and did a lot of direct services with the students. We were able to incorporate that. So sometimes the case manager and a lot of exceptional student services. I know in Cortez, they went to a fully remote case management system. So the case manager, just to kind of explain what that does, that is the person that writes the 15-page individual education plan for each student. It is done collaboratively, but that's the person that has the paperwork, that's checking off the boxes on a quarterly basis and making sure that everything that we say we're going to do for that student is getting done, and that all of their needs are driving that plan, right? Like that the needs of the students would drive those plans. So sometimes that is the same person. You're writing the plan, you're developing the plan, and you're implementing it. Sometimes you're developing a plan and then someone else is doing parts or all of that implementation. Any questions? You guys can pop in and ask questions if you, okay. And then moving around to the bottom right corner is the paraprofessionals. Sometimes you'll hear that term. It's odd how terminology shifts. I think it's like every 3 or 5 years, they're like, oh, this sounds better. So a lot of times now you're hearing them called para-educators, paraprofessional, para-educators. Sometimes it'll just be short and they'll say, oh, we have a para coming in today. Those can look a little bit different depending on the situation and the needs of the program and of individual students and teachers. We actually, within our BOCES, have a great paraprofessional academy. And so there's a lot of education and value going into that part. Sometimes if you have a student that has some significant needs, and we'll kind of get into that, the paraprofessional is assigned directly to that student and they maybe stay with them all day long. Sometimes it's a hybrid where the paraprofessional may be working with 1 or 2 or 3 students that have similar group needs, and then they shift to do some other things. Sometimes there's a paraprofessional that maybe just works in one area and then rotates through different students doing that way. So there's a couple different ways those services can be provided. Some of that is really driven off their area of expertise and comfort, right? What knowledge they bring to the table and what they're good at. And then the bigger box over here isn't, it's only bigger because it fits a lot more in it. But these are all weighted very equally on the team. These are our specific service providers, and sometimes you'll hear them called SSPs. There's so many acronyms. I'm sorry. It feels like education alphabet soup. So I want to take just a couple minutes to go through. These are people that are provided through our BOCES. If we were to have to hire these individuals, it would be a ridiculous cost, and not all of them are always necessary. So really in the ESS realm, the service providers are dictated by the needs of our caseload. Again, needs is a big part of what drives things. And so we may not need an audiologist and a vision person on staff full time, but if we need that service for one student, we have to have a full-time person to do it. So that's what BOCES kind of provides for us. So the school psychologist or the specialist, that's the position that I've been doing this year, and Brandy Durr has done in the past. That person is largely, they're a mental health provider, they are a mental health specialist, and they're also in charge of all of the evaluations. So they're doing all of the screening assessments and things like that for our kids that are either being identified or are already identified and within the ESS program or caseload. Typically that person or is on campus 2 or 3 days, 2.5 days a week. Again, it's really needs driven. So it really depends on what's written in the student plans that are on our caseloads, how that person's job looks. Fortunately, this year I've been here every day, which has been kind of a cool way to do that. We also have a school social worker, and that person actually functions as primarily as a counselor, as somewhat of therapeutic services and consult, specifically for kids with serious emotional disabilities. They do come in and do some explicit instruction and behaviors and things like that. But again, very selectively for very specific student-driven needs. That person is also, the way our district really, the way it's functioned over the last 8 years that I've been part of it, most of these service providers are here about 2 days a week. They seem to be able to service elementary 1 full day, and then 6-12 or secondary another day. And then we just rotate that. And it's not a hard line either. If there's kids, you know, depending on what they need to touch in with kids, we do have a couple service providers that, you know, certain kids need certain days of service, and they are always willing to meet that. Speech language pathologist, I think that one's pretty apparent when it comes to like actual spoken language. I think a big part of this position that people don't understand is this is also social and functional communication. So perhaps there's a student who's on the autism spectrum and has a really hard time saying what they mean or adapting that or communicating that or making those interactions. There's also some work there that the SLP will do to help with that functional communication piece and the social aspects of that. Occupational therapist, those are things that tying shoes, handwriting, you know, buttoning up your shirt. Some of us, you know, you take for granted things that, you know, that you can do different tasks like within the classroom. If you need help with keyboarding, if we need to get different sizes of things, or they do kind of function a little bit into small motor, things like that. If you need adaptive keyboards or adaptive, a different type of mouse or a different, something to make your pencil work better, right? Things like that. Physical therapy is, I think that's gross motor, and that's something that if kids have mobility issues, then that's where that specialist, up until physical therapy, our speech and our OT, those people are also here 2 days a week, pretty regular services. Like we've got a lot of kids, sometimes they even just have a little bit of need. And we do see that for the most part, it tends to, those services tend to phase out as the students age. Sometimes those speech needs are really important when students are younger, and then they may just be on a consult as they get into high school. I have called in a speech language and said, hey, we need to really work on this kid can't talk when they're in a job interview situation. So can you come in and can we really look at that scenario? And so we do that. Physical therapy is really just that. It's really gross motor, if there's any physical impairment or impingement there or disability there, they come in and do that. It could be permanent, and sometimes this can be short-term. There could be kids that are just having physical therapy services because they had a surgery or there's something that, you know, it's just a short-term need. Sometimes that does happen. And then vision and hearing, we do have a full audiologist at BOCES that we've had them come in the past and work with students, especially, this is an interesting thing, 2 of the students that I've had that were hearing impaired did not want to wear their hearing aids. I don't know what it is, they just don't want to wear their hearing aids. So finding reworks for that in the classroom, making sure they're seated and making sure that they can read lips, or maybe they could get a microphone or things like that. And then vision is just that. To my knowledge, I don't know that we've had anyone that had significant vision impairment, but they could move into the district tomorrow, and then this person would come in and make sure that we had everything in place to facilitate those needs. So that is the team. And when I say team, this year, as the ESS specialist, I've had this entire team as needed. I haven't had any vision or hearing, but we've met once a week. And then they've serviced our students predominantly 2 days a week. Any questions around that?
How many ESS students do you have?
So total in the district, and this is kind of an approximate, because sometimes right now we're sitting at around 65. Yeah, and I'll get to some of that breakdown. I kind of did, what I thought was really important, and I think a lot of time, if you guys flip over on the back, there's a little arrow. I think sometimes there's an annual or a yearly, and I didn't want to say annual because I don't want to reuse that word, and you'll see why in a minute, but yearly, there is a process that each student that is part of our ESS caseload goes through. The first box, you'll see 3 choices here, and it's an initial evaluation, an annual review, and that's an or a triennial reevaluation. So it's important there that one of these 3 things is happening every single year, but not all 3 of them, right? So if there's a student that hasn't been on the caseload, that's when we have an initial evaluation, and that is very comprehensive. We go through academic, cognitive, physical, sensory, we really touch on every single area. Obviously, teachers are referring things. So if there's specific areas like orthographic processing or the way they're reading or math, like those are all looked at completely. But then if there's an area of higher concern, that's a little bit deeper. I have been able to, as the specialist, have been able to do those initial evaluations this year. And I will say that there's a lot of stuff that we're seeing definitely related to COVID. Those numbers are kind of coming up. We're seeing a little bit of an increase. Some of that could be COVID. Some of that, I think just everything increases with time. Perhaps that's what that is. So the initial evaluation is just that. Generally, those happen at the elementary level. There are situations where middle school and high schoolers, especially if they come in new to the district, because we are such a small and the best district in the region, sometimes we are able to see things that maybe have gotten missed at other districts, right? So we may have a student that's older and we're just going like that kid, there really is something going on there that we need to evaluate. So that's the initial evaluation. Annual reviews. Once a kid is identified to need special education services and they're enrolled in our ESS caseload, every single year at an anniversary date, their plan and their program and their needs and their goals are reviewed every single year. And the entire team gathers to do these reviews. And then every 3 years, there's a complete reevaluation. Parts of that, and I say complete, generally we won't redo a cognitive assessment. Your IQ doesn't hugely change unless there was a head injury or something significant that happens there. But the reevaluation is pretty thorough, again, pretty comprehensive, just to make sure that every 3 years the kids, we're looking at where they are and we're really reassessing what's going on there. So that's kind of the first steps. Then the team does develop, and the full team develops and revises those students' goals based on their needs. What do they need and what goal, we are going to measure those goals. And they determine the service delivery together. So we'll have a content teacher or gen ed teacher, we'll have an occupational therapist, and that whole team really collaborates on how we're going to provide that service, those students with what they need, and then to make sure they're going to meet the goals that they individually have. And then finally, just that implementation of it. So the program is done, and then we're progress monitoring. Usually we do a quarterly, sometimes it's a monthly, but we do a quarterly progress monitoring at least, just to kind of say, maybe the student has a really huge growth bubble and they meet their goals within a couple of weeks. So we want to be able to redirect, and we want to use that data to inform new instruction, right? At any point in time, we can call another meeting and say, hey, this student has met all their goals. Let's revise their goals. Let's go ahead and have a quick team meeting, revise their goals, and go forward. So that's one student. That is the process that the entire team does for one student every single year. Any question? I know, I think that was a good one to highlight. Any questions on that? Okay. And then this is something, trying to do this in non-academic language and so that it's relevant and kind of transparent for everyone to see. again, I think it's really important that we look at this as a need-based program, like these students' needs are what drive this. And then look at how this just naturally is allocated within our district. So that first box that you have here is what's kind of in the industry been called resource. And you might hear it as it's a resource room, or these are, I really kind of cringe when people say they're resource students. I haven't used this term in the high school since I've come in. We kind of did away with it. Just because it had kind of flatlined, and it just needed some new life. But what that is this is our most inclusive, programming. There's a little bit of push in and pull out services. So what that means is either the ESS teacher or the paraprofessional is in the gen ed classroom with these students. And a lot of times that model is really done in a co-teaching. I know Josh and I have done that together within his health class. And the students just know that, oh, we've got, every Monday, Miss Giles is just kind of part of this class. They don't necessarily know what we're doing or who we're servicing or how we're helping, but it really helps to have a positive triangulation of like, okay, I can look at Josh's teaching and how it's kind of that access piece, what he's teaching and how he's doing it, and then how the students are receiving it, to really kind of hone everybody in on, okay, well, when your teacher says this, you want to make sure you're getting this, this piece, and then kind of bringing it back around. The pull-out services are just that, and that's usually where you'll see on the kids' schedule. In lower grades, it'll either be ESS or resource. At the high school level, it's a little bit different. In middle school, we are looking at a resource. In the high school, we usually look at that as transition or post-secondary readiness, because the skills that they're doing, by that time, the skills that we're doing are either getting them ready to get in high school and still transitioning to that, or really kind of getting them ready to kind of shoot off. But these are skill-specific interventions. So it might, if their goals are specific, if their IEP goals are specifically related to math or reading, there's a really skill-specific goal in there that we're working on. Sometimes their behavior and self-regulation goals, right? This kid really needs a checklist for everything they do to help them get through it. And then sometimes it's sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Sometimes it's an executive function is kind of that, like, how do you know when it's ready? How do you know when it's done? And then it may be as simple as, now you did it, make sure you turn it in, right? Because a lot of times that is just part of the disorganization or the lack of focus there. And these numbers are ballparked. It's really hard. Not all kids tidy fit in exactly one of those categories. Sometimes there's a little overlap between these first two, but that's about 70% of that 65 of those 65 kids. It's about 75% of our student population that is identified is in that category. That is the one that I think our kids really thrive, and you see this and they have like really this seamless integration of getting their needs met. Like kids don't have any idea who's in that 70% really at all. It's pretty streamlined, pretty inclusive. And then we move over to the next category where there are some more specialized needs. So with more specialized needs, you're going to see more pull-out services, right? Maybe that student needs some more frequent, they might get pulled out, the last 10 minutes of a class every time because they need to move, or they need some really different, they need to check in and check out, social emotional, like they need some more supports there. And that's what that effective needs are, really behavior and social emotional. And then moderate needs could be students that have some mobility or that have a cognitive impairment, a slight cognitive impairment. And they just need a couple minutes to check off in between things, or they need, the skills that they need are a little bit too much to do within Josh's health class, right? You wouldn't be able to do that in the class without everybody knowing you guys are totally doing something different right now. And it would be a disruption in class. So those are kind of the more pull out moderate need services. Those students generally have one or more SSP service, which could be speech, could be language, could be behavior, could be PT or OT, like all the occupational therapy and physical therapy. So it could be some of those, could be a combination of them. Every student's need is really what drives the bus here. And that's about 23% of our student population. For the majority, and this is where the lines aren't really hard and fast, for the majority, these students have what we call a least restricted environment of about 80%. That means they are with their peers, they're with their neurotypical peers, their non-disabled peers, as much as possible. So like some of those kids may only get pulled out 10 or 15% of their day. Some of them may use that full 20% window, but never more than 20% for the most part. Then we move over, and this category is this significant support needs. There are, right now, there are currently 5 students in the district that have a designated one-on-one paraprofessional. That means that student's needs are so significant that they really need a specific person. They cannot make it through the entire day. We have a couple students that have to have like a designated one-on-one, and that is their person, and that's who they're with. And then we have a couple students that they can share one-on-ones. They just need someone. It doesn't matter if it's a certain person or not. But there's five different paraprofessionals within our district that are servicing those students. These students they have a more restricted environment because their needs dictate some time and space for life skills, right? They may need help with the bathroom. They may need help with some more profound things that don't fit easily into the general education classroom. They may have some higher behavior needs, right? They may need to be isolated to feel regulated and to keep themselves and other students safe, right? They may need a more restrictive environment there. And then they generally do solicit a lot more specific student services. So they probably do have some physical therapy, some occupational therapy, and some speech that go along with that. And right now that we are looking at about 7% of our ESS caseload are students that fit into that category. So that's kind of an overview of what Mancos ESS, our program and services and needs look like. Any questions?
So I think, like, to budget for this, do you take that amount from all the students that, like, we get the money from?
So there's some monies that come from the state and the federal government that are specifically allocated to support kids that have been identified with a disability. And that is not an adequate amount for it. It's probably only about 20% of what it needs to be to meet the actual needs. So the school district then makes up the other 80% out of the general fund. So out of these 10, we have 10 full-time employees at the school district that work with students that have special needs. And those full-time employees are all paid out of the general fund. What we get, that extra money we get from the federal government and the state government, is money that we give to the BOCES to help us with all these SSPs. And so we give them all that IDEA money, which is the federal money, which is the federal law. And then we write the BOCES a check for about $70,000 a year. And then the school district pays for those 10 employees. So our system, frankly, is not a just system for our kids with disabilities. It's not recognizing the circumstance of reality. And that is across the board. That's throughout the states, that's throughout the country. So we're not alone, but it is a flaw with our education system.
Has the new push for Medicaid dollars around school funding trickled down at all yet?
Not that I know of. And being a smaller district, it's hard. We really only have one Chrissy. And she is a superstar, but seeking out Medicaid dollars can require additional labor to do that. So there's a cost benefit analysis there. And there's even more to what you're saying than I fully understand, Rebecca.
I'll
just
dig
to be
into that.
completely transparent, yeah.
You say this program is growing, but you don't know
Why is there, what's going on?
I mean, it just the nature, I mean, I think all of as our enrollment grows, I mean, everything kind of does there. I mean, we've been really careful that we did put a lot of parameters in place with our evaluations to try and analyze like the COVID impacts, right? There are some students, Todd, I see you bubbling over there.
Yeah.
I think student need is just something that, I mean, just across the board, there's a lot more students being identified and a lot more people being identified with disabilities in general. So I think that's a factor. There are a lot more kids. I want to say it used to be there was somewhere around like 1 in 44 kids on the spectrum, and now it's like 1 in 86. It has almost doubled to look at those numbers just in general. So I think that's kind of a social aspect. Did you have something to add to that?
No, I agree with what you just said.
Yeah.
I think there's a social component to a greater awareness and which are driving our identifications up appropriately. And then I also think that there is a COVID effect where we had an incredible amount of stress in our society for over 2 years. And we had displaced kids and we had stressed out parents. And I really think that really impacted kids a great deal also. And I think that leads us nicely into why we decided to ask Josh to be a full-time dean at the secondary level.
So I just have a kind of, okay, so here I go. Think of what I'm saying and not kind of how I'm saying it. Can we do we screen transfer students?
Absolutely.
Because that's a huge burden on our district if we have kids coming out of district to this district and we have to service them. Do we screen that?
Yeah,
Or
go
do
ahead.
we-
You
I'll
want to take
go
that?
ahead
You
and
take
yeah,
that, yeah.
so
That's a good
I'll
one.
take it.
Mhm, that's a big one.
So it's a legal issue
Mhm.
also. And so we cannot not allow a student to join our district if they have a disability. The only thing we can do is, or what is appropriate for us to do is, if we cannot service that student to meet their needs, then we can say we can't take you because it's a disservice to that student. So it's really both sides of that coin.
Okay. What about disciplinary?
Oh, for discipline, yeah, that's one of the things.
There's students that do float from school to school.
Right, yeah, and we can not allow a student to join our school district if they've been expelled, or if they would have been expelled for an offense that we would have expelled them for.
Then just one other thing, Angela,
Yeah.
like these acronyms, like ESS,
I know.
are those Mancos acronyms or are these?
No.
These are educational.
No,
These are, yeah,
Okay,
these
okay,
are
I was just
education,
curious,
yeah.
if someone getting ESS student, services here moved, if those, I just was curious. if
Yeah, no,
these were
they,
Mancos or.
no, the majority of these are largely national, different states, because at the state level, the identifying, like when you identify a student with a disability, those things take on a little bit different, like it's done state per state. So for instance, a student here that has a serious emotional disability, it would be titled that, an SED, a serious emotional disability. It might just be titled an emotional disability somewhere else, right? There's a little bit of variance, but, and then there are a little bit of different parameters. And just a real quick clarifier too. So not every student that has a disability is automatically put on an IEP. So we do have, that's why we have that evaluation, that initial evaluation process. So in order to be on an IEP, your disability, there has to be evidence that your disability is a barrier to your education and that we can provide services that will offset that. So if those two things don't happen, then one, you don't qualify for special education services, or two, we would refer you to another school because we can't service those needs. So there are those two things. It's not just an automatic, you have a disability, here's your IEP, right?
So the students aren't really fluid coming in and going out of this program. That once they're in this program, they're in there for a couple of years.
Yep, the parents can choose to exit at any point in time. And then students have to requalify. They have to meet all of the same state
So they-
qualifying factors every 3 years.
So then they can develop socially and move out of the program.
Yeah, our goal is, I mean, obviously, depending on the severity of their needs, but yeah, that would sort of be a goal, is to exit them, is that we're seeing that growth and that they're able to access education and we could exit them.
And then one thing we don't want to do also is conflate who Angela works with, her focus versus who's Josh's focus.
Right.
Angela's focus are kids that have a disability, and they've gone through a rigorous process to identify that disability. And there's been a plan made to help those kids with that disability. Josh may be seeing kids more that are having a behavioral issue because maybe they're a teenager and teenagers do that, or maybe because they're having troubles at home or something else. So it's important not to conflate those two. The only thing they have in common is Mancos School District has a commitment to serve kids with their needs. Whatever they need, we have a commitment to meet that need. And that's where they're in the same bucket. Otherwise, they're working with different kiddos. And those kiddos, of course, get crossover too. Okay. Josh, tell us about you.
All right, it's my cue. So many of you guys know that this year I served as a half-time dean of students, and I taught the other half. So I have, my couple health classes, couple PE classes, and then I'm teaching those, and I run around and do my dean of students stuff, and then back to class. And Mr. Rittner and I really came to the very obvious conclusion that it was a good idea for us to have a dean of students again in the school district. We haven't had it for a couple years. And the whole purpose of having a dean of students was so that we can help teachers be teachers and help principals be principals. So that, like, a discipline issue is not something that bogs a teacher down. Of course, they have to have their own classroom management and they have to try to develop in those skills. But at one point, at a certain point as a teacher, if you're spending all your time dealing with discipline issues, then you can't teach. So that's where I come in, where if there's a discipline issue, I come in and I relieve the teacher, and we go from there. So there was a real need. We felt like that. So they hired me for halftime. We've found that obviously there's a need for me to be full-time. This year alone, we've had 126 incidents that needed my services as a dean of student. So that's a lot. That's a lot. How many school days do we have?
144.
144. So it's 126 incidences in just the secondary level.
The secondary level.
Yeah, the secondary. So that's middle school and high school. So that's quite a bit.
And so how many students are in those two?
Right around 260.
Okay.
And of course, you have like repeat offenders and stuff like that. It's not that all of a sudden we just like have bad kids, right? It's all of a sudden we have the resources, which is myself, to address the issue.
Yeah.
And that's why, and I've tried to be extremely thorough in my documentation this year, really, because it helps with like grants and stuff, and then it helps like support my position, whatever. I'll need it. Just so you know.
Yes, you are.
Just so you know. Okay, and then, so I'm gonna go full-time next year. It's pretty obvious that we have this need. A couple things worth noting as well is we have for years had this PBIS program, which is positive behavior intervention and supports. And this is like trying to develop a real positive culture in our schools so that kids want to be here at school. They feel good about being in school. The way this has looked in the past is like we may have like a BMX biker come in and do some tricks for us, and elementary kids love it and they're excited to see it. Or we may have like some, we did this, I forget what the program was called, this thing where this guy came in and he played like a game show with the kids, the high school kids, and I don't know, but like, it's just these positive things, and like a award system. Those were hard this year for us to keep at because I was so busy. And in the past, the dean of students have been, has like really been in charge of implementing a lot of this stuff. So we're hoping that next year I can get in, not only just be reactive, but also be proactive as far as getting these great programs, this PBIS program stuff up and running, to have a positive culture so that kids like coming to school. So another thing that is new that would require Adina students and teachers to adapt into this program is the restorative practices program. And I don't know if everyone here has heard of that, but I'll get into that more later. I got my own little section for that. Actually, that's segueing into it right now. Okay, so forgot there's the next one on my list. So restorative justice, it's like, so you have like, when you're looking at discipline, you have like a punitive punishment, typically like, oh, you did this, this is your infraction, like this is worth of detention, or you ISS or out-of-school suspension, whatever. But they found in the past that this doesn't always work, just having punitive punishment. There's gotta be other ways for the kid to like learn about this behavior that they're exhibiting and how to make peace with the other students, because there's all these conflicts that are happening. So restorative justice, you get a lot of different opinions around it. Some people don't like it because they feel like you just sit around in a circle and tell your feelings and that's it, nothing, the kid doesn't get scolded or whatever. Other people feel like it's really great and it's the only way we should go. So we're kind of, the way we're functioning at Mancos is like, we give the punitive punishment, but we assess that situation, say, do we need a restorative justice to happen in the situation? And if so, we try to make that happen. And so we're hoping to up that program where we're seeing a lot more restorative justice. Out of 126 incidents that we had this year, 63, not different students, but at 63 different students who made those infractions received restorative justice practices. So like, there may have been a conflict between like 3, let's say, middle school girls. And so, those 3 girls received the restorative practices, got the services. So that would be 3 out of the 63 times that a student has received that. So it's a decent amount. It's way more than we've ever done. We're just kind of touching on this and we want to dive into it more. But it is like where you do talk about, you do like get in a group and you like hash it out, for lack of better words. You're like, so how does this make you feel? What happened? How does this make you feel? And every student and or teacher gets a chance to say what happened and how they make it feel. And they have to not talk when the other person's talking and honor that and just kind of hash it out. And you end it with like a plan on how to make it better. So like really, a lot of times kids walk out of there feeling like they've been heard and like feeling like that people care about them. And so it's kind of this unique way of trying to solve the issue rather than just you got a detention.
Mhm.
So we're going in that direction, but not fully 100% direction. We still have punitive consequences as well. Okay,
You
so
can have both.
yes, that's what I would like to see is both those. And so that brings us to like our tiered behavior. When you're talking about like punitive consequences and like how we categorize different behaviors, you just take one and pass around. Right now we're functioning on like 3 different levels or 3 different tiers that an infraction can fall under. So like your level 1 would be something that's not as severe. Your level 3 would be something that's pretty severe. And so with each infraction that we have, or each incident that we have, out of the 126 incidences that we've had in secondary, each one of these is kind of fall under one of these categories. And these are just examples. Like obviously there's way more infractions that you can have besides these listed here. That just gives you an idea of what tier, what consists of in each tier. So like level 1, disruptive behavior in class, cafeteria, littering on campus, cell phone misuse, dress code violation, cursing out loud, public display of affection, use of non-motorized, motorized transportation devices on campus, just kind of some minor things. Okay, well, what's gonna happen there is the teacher should just give a warning. You know, that's what we're hoping. The teacher has a discussion, say, hey, this is a warning. And then a second time, again, hey, look, we've addressed this once, here's your second warning. And then if it happens a third time, then it's moving to tier 2, level 2 right here, where, you know, there's probably gonna be a detention, after school detention.
So that's what referral means.
Yeah, referral mean, think of detention, well, think of referral as not a detention, but referral as a write-up slip. Like, I'm gonna write you up, and now it's going to.
And you gotta go to you. So
Yeah.
sorry, so,
Yeah.
sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but, so I've heard that being written up, and I don't understand what happens with the write-up.
So, it's an awesome question. So what happens is, level 1, tier 1, we want teachers to try and deal with it in the classroom. Morning, obviously, this is a pattern from the kid. The third time, you write them up, and then what a write-up or referral means is that now it goes to the dean of students, and it is his job to see where we want to go from here. So that's when we take it out of the teacher's ball court,
Okay.
which is great for a teacher. Because it's like, I tried to do all I could in the classroom, it's not working, Mr. Gardner, here you go. You know, it's you please deal with this so I can continue teaching. And so the referrals is basically, you're getting a write-up to the dean of students.
Thank you.
And yeah, that's a great question. So like level 2, you're just seeing like the first ones, you're just seeing like, again, it's your third warning of the level 1 stuff. But then as you go down there, you start seeing some other stuff that's kind of severe, like driving recklessly around campus, cursing out a student, minor bullying, harassment, blatant disregard to reasonable request from a staff member, failure to appear, teacher detention, just on and on. It just feels like these are just a little bit worse infractions than level 1. And then so the kid's probably gonna get a detention after school. But you gotta remember, in the past, we didn't even have after school detentions. Like, we've totally revamped our entire like discipline structure. We've tried like lunch detentions in the past and stuff like that, and it just, there's never really any repercussions. And so it's a lot, so it's way different this year. Kids are having real tough, at the beginning of the year, kids are having a real tough time adjusting to it. The goal is to hold them much more accountable for their actions. And then tier 3, level 3, you're talking about vaping, chewing, smoking, being under the influence of drugs, skipping class third time, vandalism, theft, physical, sexual abuse, major bullying, stuff like that. And it continues on the back page. And then the stuff, where it says dress code reference, I can hold off on that. And you guys have questions about how like the tier process works here before I get in the dress code? Like this is like a guideline. So what's nice about this is each situation that happens is very unique, and each kid, you want to think about what's the best thing for the kid. I mean, this is a guideline. It's not written in stone. And so like sometimes kids just need that restorative justice, right? So maybe you back down a little bit. Maybe we want this kid in school. We don't want to just keep putting this kid in OSS, and he's not attending school. Let's do something that's going to work with this kid. Okay, let's go ahead and do some more restorative justice stuff with him. Let's back down on the punitive thing. And so you got to look at each individual situation and kind of cater to the need of the student. What do you think is going to be effective for that student, for the teacher and the other students? And so this is a good guideline, but it's not set in stone.
Say, with my kids, this is, if it's vague, if it's not to the point, my kid will pull up the school handbook and be like, but it says
Yeah.
right here. I mean, if it's, if
Yeah.
it's vague enough, kids are smart,
Yeah, they are.
especially when it comes to getting out of trouble.
Yeah,
They will go to the handbook and be like, no,
Yeah.
it says right here. here, so I'm just saying, it's
Yep.
good to say, well, we can go, you know, but kids know, they know how far to push it because they will
They will
do that
push it.
research.
If they only worked as hard at doing the right thing as they did
Yeah,
at getting
yes,
out
no, I
of
hear you.
Right.
it.
Life would be easier.
Yeah, it'd be easy, but not as interesting. Okay,
And the students that are not necessarily on any of these levels, do they understand the levels and
so
the fact that there might be a mix of punitive and restorative?
this is all very new this year.
Okay.
And not all the students, we need to bring up the awareness big time. Like we presented this to the kids. The idea was each teacher was gonna present in their classroom. Not all kids got the message. And that's part of the reason why it was a very abrupt change from our students, from what I call a very laxed atmosphere concerning discipline to a very, you're held accountable atmosphere. Because I feel like it's a very abrupt change and the kids struggled with it a little bit, and I think they're adjusting.
I think parents struggle too, because parents were not presented with
Yeah,
this.
yeah,
So parents also, I think, were.
yeah, for sure. That's completely accurate. And so we do need to make this more transparent and like I said, it's a huge change and we just threw it in there super fast and, yeah, with me being full-time, I hope I've reached that goal, being way more transparent and having this out there. This will be in the handbook and it'll be
And
much
I
more
think
visible.
adding something about the restorative justice to this piece might be good.
Yeah.
Because that explains that we're not just punishing,
Right,
we are really trying to create solutions.
yeah.
No.
Mhm.
How successful is the restorative justice to prevent the infractions or whatever?
I just came up, I had some kids, I'm finding out that for the victim being the person who supposedly got made fun of or bullied or whatever, I'm finding out that the restorative justice is very, very healing for them. Like they feel very heard, they feel very, they feel like we love them and we care about them and wow, you're doing something about this. Like I've got tons and tons of comments from the kids about, wow, thanks for actually doing something this year about it. And then I've gotten that from parents as well. Now, for the kids who are the offenders, they're starting to kind of see the other perspective, but it's not necessarily changing their behavior like that. So,
So you've done this the whole year?
yeah, when I've personally felt, or Mr. Rittner and I together personally felt that it's necessary, for specific cases, we have implemented the restorative justice, but this here, the tier discipline is, I've been using both the entire year.
Do you notice since you've been part-time dean of students that discipline's getting better from the beginning of the year?
Yeah, well, it's tough, man. I've just been.
I know it's new, so.
Well, let me tell you, is this an evaluation of my progress? They're getting way better. I think it's gonna take time. I think the kids are getting the message. I've gotten really great feedback from staff members. The best feedback I've gotten is from staff members. I've gotten good feedback back from parents that say, wow, I really feel like you're following up and you're really doing something about it. I've gotten a lot of that. And then with the students, I've just got like a lot of like, oh goodness. Like, you're serious? Like, yeah, I'm serious. So like, it's gonna take some time for these kids to adjust. It's like setting up your own classroom, you gotta stick to your guns for quite a long time and not ever let them down or.
Becomes
kids
part
are
of the
gonna-
culture.
Yep, it will take time for it to become part of the culture.
Yeah.
So, but I feel like the adults around me are buying into it, and I feel like people are buying into it, so that's good.
Josh
I think
seems like
I think
he's like a
it's
superhero cape
I-
for what he does.
I bet, like, I can imagine, I'm a parent and I've substitute taught, and that's awesome.
Yeah,
I can imagine how much that helps teaching.
But I think like the way you do this, and I wish people could see that more. It's authoritative, it's direct, but it's respectful. And the way the kids react to Josh is amazing. So the biggest thing for them is they're really sad he won't be teaching next year. And that he really garners that respect. And we really appreciate you.
thank you.
I have a question for you, Josh.
Yeah,
On like the level 3, the vandalism, that is part of the restorative stuff, them cleaning up the messes.
yeah, we've had that. We've done that. We had a very specific case like that.
Because I know there were some instances last year where the custodial staff had to do it, and that's disgusting.
Yeah, we did have an instance where we had some kids staying after vacuuming in elementary and stuff like that,
Good.
helping out the custodial staff. Yeah, the restorative justice for us is really in its infancy, and not only just having them go over there and do that work for the custodial staff, but we're hoping to see these kids sit down with the custodian, with the person who would have to clean this up, and sit down with the teacher that they're just, that they're giving them so much hard time. Like, we're trying to have all parties involved be part of the healing process and part of the correcting the behavior process.
Are parents involved in any of this?
Or just teachers and staff?
The parents are not, like, we do not like say, hey, you should be part of this restorative justice process. We like try to inform the parent, this is the approach we want to take, and we get varying opinions on it, because we just, as a community, we just need to be more educated on restorative justice as probably a population altogether. So we're trying to bring that aware. Again, we could have a lot more awareness about this. We're making them aware of it, but they're not part of this process where they're sitting down. It's really just the victims and the offenders, or the victims and offenders, and
So when are the parents of the offenders finally notified that something's going on?
well, the parents are notified. The parents are typically notified before this would ever happen.
Okay.
Yeah, like for 126 incidents right here, there's been 126 parent contacts.
Okay.
So every single.
Is that at like level 2?
Like skipping
Yeah,
steps?
Level 2, yep. Every referral paper that I get, I have communicated with the parents.
Okay.
And then in that communication, if I felt like it was something where restorative justice should take place, then I communicate that with the parents. Sometimes it may be me saying, I feel like this would work, or me asking permission or whatever.
So does this ever cross into the online world?
Some of the stuff that they're doing, like,
Social media?
oh,
Like.
goodness,
bullying.
yes. I mean, I've dealt with tremendous amount of incidents where kids are bullying other kids online, on the phone, and just like, yeah, like when we look at the bullying stuff, there's a ton of incidents happening over the phone, and yeah, definitely, it's crossing into there.
During school hours or even after, are you saying? Like two people,
Both. So if it involves the school, if it involves like the safety of the school or the well-being of the school, then, the stuff that's happening outside of school counts as well. So, yeah, so like it's a safety issue, or a kid doesn't feel safe at school, or someone we feel like the well-being of the school or students is at risk, then some of it is outside of school. Yeah.
To that, sorry, I was gonna say to that end, I really appreciate the restorative justice growing. So I think what you said about students, victims feeling heard and that the school is doing something is creating more safety within the school, because we see trends that those who have been victims become perpetrators. So I just want to say thanks as a parent
Oh,
for that preventative
well,
piece.
this is crazy. So we had an unbelievable teacher appreciation week. And like the students, I think Miss Valley set this up where she did the post-it notes for the teachers. She had students do that. So my whole door was filled with like post-it note thank yous and stuff like that. All of us teachers got it. Felt really good and stuff. And I started reading through them. And I had out of like a whole door full, I had like 12, I feel safe in school because of you. And I was like, I didn't want or expect that type of return, like, and I started thinking about it, I was like, oh, it has to, it probably has to do with this.
I think that's the power of restorative justice. So
Yeah.
I'm really
Yeah.
excited.
That number is
to
way
pursue it.
more than it reflects.
Yeah, so, yeah, there's something to be said about it. And like I said, we're in the infancy stage of it.
As much as I hate to ask, is this something that's gonna be put into the elementary level also?
I actually have the same
I wish I
question.
had the same question.
Yes.
I guess, don't overwhelm me.
There's some-
Tom, I think we're gonna start with some training, but I think we're gonna, you know, we're gonna have a new era. And so with the new era, we're gonna have some new processes. And, you know, the most influential person in a school is the principal. And so we just hired a new principal at the elementary, and I'm very excited for what he'll bring. But, you know, this will be important work for him.
I was gonna say at the preschool, it's something we try to do. Like if somebody, like in my classroom, I have like what's called a sleeping bag. And if somebody hits somebody or kicks them or whatever, you know, I think parents often say, well, where do they go in timeout? And we don't do that, because when somebody gets isolated, it doesn't really resolve the problem. They need their community to remind them how to behave. And that's essentially what restorative justice is. So if somebody, does something towards somebody else that's not okay, we'll go, and usually I have to go with them. I have to help them co-regulate to do it, but they'll go and get the bag and they'll bring it to the person they hurt, and the person can pick out like a Band-Aid or, cold pack or, whatever's in there. And it's a way to involve the person and the victim together. So that one person's been isolated or shunned. And it happens over and over and over again, so that the kids totally do it on their own now. Like they know they have the tools. But also that extends towards like if they break something, and whether it's in anger or just because they broke it, they fix it. But we have to help. So I feel like if those things are started early, it's basically taking responsibility for your actions, and it helps a lot, rather than being isolated or.
And I think where Josh is too, we see by the time it gets to him, the hope is that the kids can start to do this themselves, right? So I saw him kind of sit down yesterday with a bunch of kids, but that's the hope, is that they can start doing that and stopping it before it gets the 5 incidents deep, and then it's to him.
So that's happened a little bit in the elementary school,
It
then
is,
with like, Nick and Brad and some of the groups they've had.
Yeah, sure. I think those guys are implementing this at a certain level. Yeah, and there's 2 other points. I mean, is it getting late? Do I need to? Okay. So, well, I'll give you like 30 seconds or less for the last 2. And I'm trying to give students more voice and more choice. So I did that through the dress code. If you're reading the Secondary Express, and you know how I'm doing that, I'm giving them more choice so that we're trying to change with the times. We're trying to figure it out. We got a lot of different people, a lot of different cultures and stuff. And then another one which is monumental, I feel like, for our secondary level, is an attendance point system that Ed and I, Mr. Rittner and I are going to put in place. We have had no answer for attendance issues in the school district for the last 10 years I've been here. And what I've been told from an administration for all these years is that there is no answer. If the state doesn't help you, you don't have any leverage, well, I kind of like refuse to listen to that because there's gotta be something. So Mr. Rittner and I came up with a attendance point system. And basically, once you get like, it is so elaborate, I can't get into all of it, but it is a way of holding the kids accountable for their attendance. It's also a way of holding the parents accountable for attendance as well. And so it's basically you accumulate so many points and you start going a direction where you're on the radar. And it's unique to where in fact that students who are failing class will go this pathway. Once they get to a certain level of points for attendance, and then kids who do not have academic issues or like failing classes, they're going this way. So we're catering to the two different types of students that we have that are missing and skipping classes.
Like unexcused, unexcused.
Unexcused and excused, because we do have some parents who will call in their kids excused all the time. And so
I've got issues with that because my daughter, the past month and a half, in half of her day, we are not doing anything, Mom. This is a waste. With one of the teachers, she has her whole half of the day. I'm like, come home, work on your online classes, get ahead in other things.
Yeah.
So I excused, like this whole last week, I've excused her for half the day.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
that's-
we've got to change. And I've addressed it with a few people, and I'm like, this is not, it's causing me anxiety
I
because
see that.
she's not learning anything.
Yeah, and that's like, we can go down the rabbit hole on that. The point system is not meant to be, it is meant to get the student to school. It's like this, where we could use it as a guideline. If we see a unique situation that you're speaking of and we communicate with the parents, of course, we have the ability to make these adjustments. But you do have, like, people do have to know there are parents there who their kid will just be like, excuse me, for the next class.
Right.
And it's happening and it's going on all year long. And so it's not meant to beat down, responsible parents. Like, it's meant to address the attendance issue at every level and for every type of kid. And it's very thorough. So that just be ready for that to roll
Okay.
out. This discussion alone for the last 4.5 hours.
So just the
Right.
communication has to be there
Yes.
to.
Yes.
We're gonna be putting it in the handbook and we're gonna be communicating it, and it's gonna be it's very elaborate, and it's, like you said, don't get anxiety over it. Like, you go into a doctor's office, you don't get points for that, stuff like that. Like, there's situations that you've talked about and those will be handled.
Okay. Awesome.
And part of the benefit too of having Josh full-time is we can all tell that he's doing a great job, and it's going to just really next year even be so much better, and the year after that even better. But it also allows Mr. Rittner now to be the instructional leader that secondary also needs. So that teachers don't run out of stuff to teach. Because when students are learning and when they're engaged,
They wanna be
show
there.
up, they wanna
That's
be
right.
there. So,
That's right.
so that's where having Mr. Rittner be the instructional leader he wants to be, and not the disciplinarian that he's had to be this year, will be really helpful also. They're a great team, and so I couldn't be more excited for our secondary. It is just, the trajectory the secondary's on is amazing.
Very happy.
All right, so do we have any other questions?
I think there's.
Do we have anything that
Might do
anybody
something
would
else.
like to bring back to the board?
You're gonna be there, because I'm not going to do this.
Okay, well then we will call the meeting adjourned. Thanks.